welcome to the School of Speech podcast, presented by SpeechTherapyPD.com. School of Speech is designed specifically for the school-based SLP to come together to discuss current topics, tackle difficult situations, and share our insights. Our goal is to bolster confidence, celebrate our triumphs, and foster a community dedicated to the excellence in the school setting. Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Carolyn Dolby and I am your SpeechTherapyPD.com host for School of Speech. School of Speech is specifically designed for the school-based clinician. We want to come together to discuss current topics, tackle some difficult situations, and really share our insights. Our goal is to bolster confidence, celebrate our triumphs, and really foster a community that is dedicated to the excellence in the school setting. Today, we have a fabulous episode working with adolescent students and why targeting critical media literacy is critical. Our guest today is Dr. Kathleen Abendroth. I'm going to start with our disclosures and then we'll get into it. Great. So Katie is a full-time salary employee at California State University, and she is also receiving an honorarium from SpeechTherapyPD.com for her participation in today's discussion. And as her non-disclosure, non-financial, Katie is board certified specialist in child language, and she's also a member of ASHA's Special Interest Groups 11, Administration and Supervision, as well as SIG 20 Counseling. For me, I receive a salary being the district dysphagia support speech pathologist for the third largest district in Texas. I'm compensated for the graduate courses that I teach through the University of Houston. I am also a consultant for school districts across the nation, supporting their program development and staff training. I also receive compensation from Speech Therapy PD to host this podcast. Non-financial, I'm a member of Texas Speech and Hearing Feeding and Swallowing Task Force. I volunteer for Feeding Matters, and I'm also a member of ASHA's Special Interest Groups. I'm affiliated with Group 13, Swallowing and Swallowing Disorders, as well as SIG 16, school-based issues. A little bit on Dr. Abendroth before we get started. She earned her BA at the University of Virginia. Then she returned to study applied language and speech science at the University of Louisiana in Lafayette. As a speech pathologist, she's been a speech pathologist since 2007. She's worked across settings with a focus on developmental language disorders, autism spectrum disorders, and adolescent language development. Katie is currently the clinical coordinator for the Mary Jane Reese Center Speech and Language Clinic at California State University in Sacramento. She is also published and presents widely on topics of research interest. So without further ado, we want to welcome you, Katie. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. I'm so excited to talk about adolescent language because I feel like this is such an area that gets lost in the weeds sometimes in our field. And over the years, I've collected a lot of fun ideas. So I'm just looking forward to sharing that with the audience.
So excited. I just want to jump right in. Could we,
Sure.
Let's start with a starting point. What would a starting point for SLPs who are working with adolescents? Maybe they're struggling to maintain engagement in sessions.
Yeah, so I think the first thing I would say to an SLP who is in a setting working with middle schoolers or high schoolers is that it is okay to feel insecure or underprepared for this population. As I've worked in higher ed, I'm really aware of the fact that we don't prepare graduate students very well for working with high schoolers or adolescents. If you think about the graduate curriculum, a lot of us are trained significantly with early intervention training in language, and then we work with older adult neuro populations in our training programs. And so then it's like when you get out and you're working with adolescents, you have to kind of just build the airplane as you're flying it, as my boss says. You're kind of making it up as you go. So I think that it's okay to feel a little insecure or uncertain if you're working with this population and you're not sure what to do. The second thing I would say is that I think it's really important to have a forward thinking perspective where you're really shifting your energy to what I call a client-centered perspective. And so I use that in contrast to a clinician-centered model. So if you think about a typical framework when you're a speech language pathologist working in an elementary school, how does that look? You walk in the room, you have a lesson plan, you have an activity laid out, you tell your group of students what you're going to work on, and it's all coming from you, the therapist, to the student, right? Or to the group of students. When we work with adults, however, and I think when we work with adolescents, it needs to be coming from the group, from the students. What is it that they want to work on? And I think that you get a lot more buy-in, you get a lot more engagement, and you get a lot more success when you start at the very basic level of letting them be part of their goals, letting them be part of driving the therapy train, so to speak.
I love the sound of that. I love letting them, motivation right there or buy-in. How would they become part of?
Oh, well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said motivation. So one thing that I really try to promote when I talk to groups of speech pathologists is what I call the 3 pillars of adolescent therapy. And if you've seen me present before, I've probably mentioned this because I feel like it's really foundational to having a strong start with adolescent groups. The 3 pillars of adolescent therapy are motivation, which you mentioned, resilience, and rapport. And so if you want, I could talk about those individually, or if you have specific questions, I could answer those as well.
Oh, no, absolutely. I am so ready to hear all of it. So why don't we'll start at the beginning. We start with motivation. Go through them.
All right. So when I think about the 3 pillars, I think about this as kind of the 3-legged stool that we're using to really ground our therapy with adolescents. Motivation, in my opinion, is a starting point because there's been a lot of research on motivation across disciplines already. And we know that we, as humans, in any endeavor, we kind of move from a state of amotivation to a state of flow, depending on the activity, right? Depending on our competence with the activity. So Carolyn, if you had to go home tonight and do your taxes, where would you land in terms of motivation?
I'm not sure I'd want to go home.
Right. You'd be in that like amotivated, like want to avoid it at all costs, right?
Right.
And similarly, if we have students who have experienced a lot of trauma and they're coming into the school system and they don't have these positive experiences in their daily school life, you sometimes encounter a lot of amotivation with adolescents because they're in a fight or flight mode. They are not really processing language as much as we want. So when we are moving along that motivation continuum and trying to encourage motivation, maybe we're not getting all the way to flow, like when we're totally absorbed in an activity, but we are fostering motivation. And how we do that in part is by selecting activities where students feel competent. And we're going to talk about this more, but that's one of the reasons I really try to target social media use and doing some activities that involve digital media. So we want to focus on areas where they might be competent. We want to focus on empowerment and really kind of creating a sense of self-advocacy and self-determination where they believe that the decisions they're making are going to impact their session. So that's the motivation piece. That's kind of a critical starting point. The second thing is rapport. So I talk about motivation, rapport, and resilience. Rapport is something that, to me, you can't have successful therapy with an adolescent student unless you have positive regard for that student. And that rapport is a two-way street. And so, of course, we are balancing our attention in a group setting. We're balancing our goals with different needs for our students. But I do try to build rapport with students by having a genuine interest and fondness for who they are as an individual. And I'm also really interested in sharing my agenda with my adolescent students. So I want them to know what we're working on. I want them to have a say in what the goals are that they're addressing. Another pillar here is resilience. And to me, this is an area that is the most malleable. It's something that can be taught. So resilience in itself can be a goal. This can be an area that you target with your adolescent students. But feelings of resilience and empowerment are really shaped as we develop. And one of the reasons I love working with adolescents, Carolyn, is because it's such a time of neuroplasticity. There's so much brain development happening, right? There's all this like white matter developing, their prefrontal cortex is developing, they're developing some self-regulation, they're developing some sense of self. And so we have a really important role, I think, to play when we can help develop those skills related to resilience. So there are some programs out there. I've got those listed in the references, but if people are interested in using resilience as a framework for therapy, I think that is something that you can do with adolescents, but it's also something you can just weave into the care that you're providing. And so with resilience, the one thing I like to point out is that it is, I think, a component of trauma-informed care when we work with students who have had really adverse childhood experiences. You guys have probably all heard the term ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And so this can include things like malnutrition. It can include abuse or divorce or housing insecurity. All of those factors can really challenge language development, and they can also challenge a child's ability to self-regulate and cope with settings. So when we develop protective factors and we build resilience and we build caring relationships with our students, well, what the research shows is that students can strengthen that like a muscle, that they can develop some better coping skills, some better self-regulation, which then puts them in a position for learning and targeting language.
That is so powerful. I love that. I love the idea of, you gave me two visuals, the three pillars, but then I loved it when you had it as the legs of a stool, and that would be a very sturdy stool to sit on if you have the motivation, you have the rapport, and then you're building on that resilience. That's wonderful. That's a great mental thought for me to take away with that. That's wonderful. I wanted to go back because I guess I never really thought about teaching resilience. That was very powerful. And taking that and using that as a goal, I could see how that could really get some buy-in on students, these older adolescents that are like, yeah, you're right. I'm going to be going out into the world. And we're part of our thoughts in the schools in the upper elementary is that transition, getting them ready and powerful, empowered. I love that. You touched on multimedia. So I kind of want to ask you some questions because when we were talking, you said multiliteracies at one point. This was before we started, and I kind of wanted to know, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so that's an important thing to define. And it's one of the areas that I really promote in working with adolescents. Really, I think with all kids, but my focus is adolescents. And this is something that is not a new idea. It's come out of English language arts research. And Carol Westby has published a few articles with the idea that multiliteracies promote equity in populations. But multiliteracies are really recognizing that reading and writing are increasingly collaborative and digital in nature. So I want to say that again, since this is kind of an audio format. Our reading and writing in our culture, in our society, is increasingly collaborative and increasingly digital in nature. And as a result, using different modes of literacy, using analog print literacy as well as digital literacy in our therapy can really foster connection. It can foster language skills, and it can really, I think, build motivation because it connects to where the students are encountering literacy. So
I love that. I love the way you
multiliteracy,
use the term analog and digital. Again,
Mhm.
I love how you basically are painting word pictures for us. I think that's really wonderful. How does that connect to critical media literacy?
Okay, so in my mind, multiliteracy is a broader umbrella. That is just recognizing that the language we encounter is not always in a book format anymore,
Hmm.
right? And that the teens that we work with, the vast majority are not sitting down to read paper books.
That's
They
true.
are reading text. They are still reading, but they're reading captions on YouTube Shorts. They're reading Instagram posts. They're reading, blogs. They're reading things online. So that multiliteracy just acknowledges the fact that literacy is in different modes.
Mhm.
Critical media literacy is a pedagogical framework. And again, it comes out of English language arts. This isn't like my original research, and I've got the references for you all in the reference sheet. Critical media literacy focuses on being able to access, analyze, and create messages in a variety of forms. So we're talking about
Analyze.
print and we're talking about online, being
Mhm.
able to analyze those messages. And the real linchpin of critical media literacy is that students are learning to analyze the relationship between the author and the audience.
Okay.
Learning to understand that when you create writing or you read something that is written down, there is some agenda, there is some reason the author wrote it. What is that reason? How can we critically analyze and assess? That's the critical part of the media literacy. It's being a smart consumer of online and print media
Mm.
with a mindset of, okay, I am the audience. What is the author's intention here? What is the relationship? This is very higher order thinking if we're talking about kids with language disorders.
Mhm. But so important, right? I mean, there's so many, what is the relationship? What is the intent behind what is being published and what is being out there is just as important as understanding the material.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they say, don't believe everything you read. That's right up there with it. Being able to analyze it and go, what's the intent? I
Yeah,
love that.
absolutely. And I think that how I came to this, if I could explain my background on this,
Mhm.
was in real world settings working with kids, because frankly, it was a little scary when we would talk about things that they were interpreting that they had seen online. And, I'm a parent of teenagers now, but I've worked with teenagers for years now. And I think especially for our kids with language disorders, they tend to be very concrete, literal thinkers. And
Right.
so they will take information that's presented to them, hook, line, and sinker. They're
Mhm.
not thinking about the author. They're not thinking about, is there another agenda here? Where it really came home to me was with influencers, social media influencers. I had students who were wanting to buy so much stuff off TikTok and off Instagram. And I realized like they didn't even realize they were being sold to. They didn't realize they were watching an ad. So it really made me start going down this rabbit hole of like, how do we teach those skills to our students? Helping them understand if what they're viewing is an ad or not, if it is a political agenda or not. I mean, you have to be a little careful professionally with, not weighing in too much of your own opinions, but I do encourage students to find their voice and their opinions with content.
I love that. I mean, I think I'm going on a limb to say that I'm sure we grew up in the same time where we didn't have influencers. That is something that I'm having to learn about. We weren't inundated by that. And I can only imagine what our students are, I mean, they're being bombarded with on these onlines. You're right, the TikToks, the Instagrams, and yeah, I'd be sucked in too.
Yeah. Yeah, what really hit it home for me, I'm gonna name drop an influencer here because it just came up so much with my kids I was working with, was the Prime energy drinks, or the Prime drinks.
Mm-hmm.
That I think Logan Paul is the influencer who really started promoting this drink. And the kids were just, I mean, the stores couldn't keep it in stock when it came out. And it was like, they would all say that they had really mixed feelings about this influencer, but they didn't associate him with making all this money off the drink, if that makes sense. So there was like this disconnect between, okay, there's this guy who is online, but I'm not connecting it with the fact that all these drinks I'm buying, he's making money off that.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, if you think about, I mean, even in the movies where they have product that is put, product placement. Yeah. I was trying to get that word out. Product placement. I'm not going to call out my sister's son, but I am right now. I just remember him growing up. He would say, I've got the blues. And he wanted the Kraft macaroni. That was sorry, those of you that did not come through the 80s and 90s, you're not going to know that commercial. And he would sing that. And in his mind, that's what you needed to eat, were the Kraft macaroni, which is that yellow and blue. I mean, it's constantly kind of coming into our subconscious.
And I think that's a really good point. Advertising has existed for hundreds of years.
Right.
So it's really just the platforms that have advanced and changed. And it might be a little more pervasive, but we've always had ads, we've always had jingles and marketing. So it's just become a little bit more interwoven into everything else they're doing online.
Yeah.
And then the other piece that I really feel passionate about mentioning is just the safety aspect.
Right.
Because when I mention this to SLPs, a lot of time the questions that arise relate to student safety. So I really try to emphasize the fact that if we have a protectionist stance where we don't allow kids with language disorders to have any online access or any social media access, we're not teaching them to be safe online. We're not teaching them the critical thinking of how do I navigate these posts that I'm seeing, or how do I engage with somebody online safely. I feel like the schools can provide a really sheltered, safe way to teach some of those skills. But it can be kind of a stretch if you haven't done that therapeutically before. And that's why we circle back to student-centered, client-centered therapy. What is it that they're interested in? What are they consuming? And you go from there.
And what are they watching? I wanted just to piggyback, because that's powerful to say, being student safety, when you're guiding and educating your own child or students, shielding them from reality doesn't prepare them for reality, is what I'm hearing. I mean, that's so true. It's out there. We need, rather than to keep it away from them, giving them that skill, that resilience that you were talking about, in order to deal with it, navigate it, critically analyze it, like you said. I missed a part of the critical media literacy. I got analyze and create, but I missed that middle one.
Access.
And
create.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I got those.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
And if I could also jump in, as you just pointed out, with the component about students. Oh, I just lost my train of thought. Hold on.
Yep.
What was I going to say? Oh, go on. I'll come back to it.
Okay. Yeah. So I just wanted to make sure I had when we're looking at critical media literacy, it's analyze, access, and create. Got it. All right. If you don't mind, what I kind of would like to kind of get into is how to connect language intervention in the schools with social media. Because I know that, how do we connect that?
Okay, perfect. I'm so glad you said that, because that just connected the dot when a second ago I lost my train of thought. That's exactly what I wanted to say, was that I think with having a stance that's a little more open to using social media, using multimodal platforms with language and literacy, it acknowledges the fact that this generation of students growing up are digital natives. And so their experience, like you said, is different than ours was growing up. And there is a social competence piece to having some exposure to online content. So I've noticed that a lot with students, if there's too much protection and they don't have any access to digital formats, they're at a social disadvantage with their peers. And so that's just another reason to kind of integrate this into your language therapy. one way that this came up, I can give you kind of a clinical application here. This is when this all really started for me. I had lots of language students in a middle school caseload who were really into a video game. And at the time it was Fortnite. Fortnite is still popular, but it's not the only one they play. So I'm not using this as a prescriptive thing that you need to go out and research Fortnite. I'm just saying at the time, that's what my students were interested in. But what I found was they would come to me and talk about it around the table or in a session. And there were some real gaps in knowledge. There were some real gaps in understanding what the terms meant. There are a lot of like double meanings with words, and they didn't fully understand the language of the game. And so we started incorporating that into therapy. And we created a video game dictionary for teachers. And so the whole point was, you guys are really competent at Fortnite. You know, us teachers, we're all just boomers and we don't understand it. We need you to help us understand it. So you're putting them in a position of competence, a position of interest. It's a topic they're interested in. And then we spent weeks, I mean weeks, going around the table, listing words that were popular in the game, talking about the vocabulary, drawing visuals for what the words meant, talking about other things that it could mean outside of the game. And then we created an actual product that was a physical book using all the terms from the video game. And I bring that example for two reasons. One, it was very student driven. So it wasn't like I came in and I was like, hey, we're going to do a Fortnite dictionary. It was like the kids wanted to talk about Fortnite. So I thought, well, how can we make this therapeutic? But the other thing is, it didn't involve me actually playing Fortnite with the kids. So sometimes speech pathologists feel a little wary of like, well, I don't want to be like on social media with the students. And I'm like, well, I'm not on social media with the students. I'm just presenting these as platforms for language and literacy. So we created a concrete printed book and we put it in the teacher's lounge. But I literally had students who were not in special education coming to me and asking if they could be in my group to help work on this dictionary. Like everybody was talking about it. It was really successful in the sense that it was student driven and it didn't involve me actually playing the game with the kids, right?
High interest.
Yeah, high interest.
And when we're talking about how you said about children that have delayed language disorder or social communication deficits, actually having their peers, typical peers, if you will, using that term, wanting to go, hey, I want in on this. That is empowering that student to be like, wow, I've got something to share. I've got something to give. That the knowledge that they're able, everyone loves to feel smart, and knowledgeable, and wow.
Yeah. So I mean, everybody has their own personalities. I have no trouble playing up the, like, I don't know anything about this, kind of the boomer card. I'll play like, I don't know what that means, even though sometimes I do. And I just kind of want them to feel like an expert. I think that's really important.
Love it.
Yeah, and so then you also mentioned social media. And so I can talk more about that if you want.
I'd love to, yeah.
Yeah, because I feel like this is really the jumping off point for working language and literacy therapy into digital media. So social media is really going to talk, I want to say it's defined as any platform that allows interaction. So that means it can be gaming, it can be sharing photos, it can be networking for professional reasons, but it's anything that allows interaction. And so it's important for us as SLPs to know that over 88% of teenagers are on social media. So again, if you're completely preventing students from accessing anything, there is like a social deficit when it comes to talking about these things. So social media, in my mind, doesn't mean getting online with kids or friending them on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. It means, or not sending them snaps. It means teaching them some of the vocabulary of some of the platforms, critically assessing posts and what the author is intending, even comparing advertisements and how to respond to advertisements. And so as we talk further, I have some fun activities I can share along those lines. But I just want to keep emphasizing, it doesn't mean I'm getting on all these platforms or I know about all these platforms and I'm friending all these kids. That's not what it means. It means that we're weaving the vocabulary, the role of the user into language therapy.
Which kind of makes, I think we're getting into how do we ensure student safety and our own safety. One is that we aren't friending we shouldn't be friending our students on any of the social medias, but how do we keep them also safe?
Yeah. So a lot of times I will use screenshots of things, and then that way you're looking at posts, but you're not necessarily, interacting with the student online.
Right. Okay. That's great. I can't wait. I want to get into strategies and activities, and I know our listeners always love to hear. So
Yeah.
that.
Well, so again, I just always try to say this is not prescriptive in the sense that you need to be jotting notes and following this step by step. It's just about generating ideas, and the ideas are always going to come from your students. So you're literally going to sit down with your group of adolescent students and build that rapport. Find out what they're interested in. Find out what they're reading. Who are they following on YouTube? What musicians are they following? What rappers are they listening to? What content creators are they into? Once you hone in on that and you get some of these names and you get some of these, data points, that's where you can kind of build something from the ground up with your students. But one thing I've done this with a lot of groups, and it's been pretty successful with high schoolers, because the video game dictionary I mentioned, that was with middle schoolers.
Okay.
This activity was really successful with high schoolers. And it had to do with, as I mentioned, I noticed they weren't really decoding when it was an advertisement or an influencer. And so I do this activity where we will compare vintage ads with online content or online ads.
Oh, wow.
And if you go back, it is so fun to pull vintage ads because there was some crazy stuff people were advertising. My favorites, there's an ad for cocaine tooth drops for kids, right? Cocaine tooth drops. And so I'd print this out. Or you can have, there are a lot of very misogynistic ads from like the 40s and 50s of like white women at home smiling with an apron on. You can kind of bring these things in as like the cultural perspective of the time. And again, from a critical media literacy perspective, we're looking at assessing, and analyzing who produced this ad, what is their agenda, what are they selling, what do they want you to think as a buyer. And when it's really old, I think it's easy for kids to look at that and it's comical. You're like, wait, they wanted to give cocaine to kids for their toothache? Like, that's crazy, right? But then what I would do is I would have screenshots of online ads. And so we would go through this unit with like vintage ads and talk about those critical media literacy components. But then I would take, one of the ones I used was Mr. Beast he's a YouTuber, but he had a sales pitch for Beast Burgers. It was like this pop-up dining restaurant thing he had. So there were all these ads for Beast Burgers. So I would use those. I would take screenshots or watch like little clips of the video of Mr. Beast selling Beast Burgers or their Feastables. It's another candy that he sells. And so we would do the same process though, that critical media literacy process. Okay, who is selling this? What is his agenda? Is he making money off of this? What does he want you to think? What are the cultural norms here that they're promoting? Who is disadvantaged by this? Who is advantaged by this? And you build up to that. I mean, you don't just start out with all those questions, blank slate. Of course, as an SLP, we have to scaffold some of that language.
Sure.
That critical thinking. But this is an activity that could take you across a month. So when SLPs tell me, well, I don't know how I would work all this in. I don't know how I'd have time to plan all this. You don't have to add extra time. This is going to save you time because what you're going to do is build this activity with your students, and you're going to break this down and scaffold the language and scaffold the activity over the course of a month, right? Then what will happen is then they come into the room and they're like, oh my gosh, I saw this ad on TikTok and, it was so-and-so selling shorts, and I realized they were influencing and they're probably making money off of it. And like, let's start to connect those dots.
Okay. Two things totally came into my mind. One, the first one, when you started talking about using those vintage ads, the first thing I thought was, hey, that's a way, like, I know when you're trying to shape a behavior, you don't always jump on their behavior. You start showing some other behaviors, not them doing it. So how amazing using the vintage ads. So they're not even not understanding. They're not feeling like we're dogging on their, media and their platforms and all the things they think are super cool. They're able to take something that they think is ridiculous that were in our times, and we took it as real. And I love that. They analyze it. They have the access. You're giving them access, so they're analyzing it and finding all of those. When you talked about critically analyzing it, right, they saw that like that.
Yeah.
And it would be neat for them to understand, we didn't see that as quickly as you are. And then the second thing that just popped in my head when I bought my car, I bought a Chevy Cruze, right? I'm not promoting Chevy Cruze, but anyway, as soon as I bought that new car, I saw that car everywhere, right? And I'm thinking, what you just did was you empowered these students to be critically thinking outside of the therapy room. Boom, carryover, generalization. That's powerful, Katie. That's amazing.
Well, and it's not perfect. I want to say that a lot of times in a group dynamic, you're going to have some students who kind of get it faster than others. But there are ways to scaffold this. And so one thing I do is I really break down hashtags. And I talk about, like, if you see this specific, if it says hashtag ad, it means that person is making money off of it. And legally, they're supposed to list that, that they can look for those clues. I call it being like an advertising detective, that they're looking for clues that something is an ad, because you can't analyze it if you can't identify it. So yeah, I mean, there's a wealth of ideas you can build from that one example. Again, you don't have to recreate that. You can just kind of like talk to your clients, your students, and see what are they into. Maybe this year it's another video game. Maybe this year it's a different YouTuber, but really trying to just connect with their worldview. But I didn't think about it from what you said, that it kind of takes the edge off when you're using older materials that they're not going to be defensive about or any kind of, yeah. And you're not approaching it as like anti-media or anti-social media.
Right. Yeah. And then another thing made me think about doing like a Venn diagram with your group to get to know, we want to get to know them, but they also might not know each other. And so what a wonderful way to find connections within the group that they have together.
Yeah.
What are they interested? Not everybody's going to be interested in the same things, but there might be that, spot in the Venn where they all come together, and that might be your takeoff starting point of, oh, that's a great topic to get started in.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, so I have two other ideas that are a lot of fun to work on with students that I think might be great for your listeners to hear and then build from.
Okay.
So another thing I've done that's a lot of fun are Amazon or product reviews. And this is really hands-on. So, our students may have a variety of abilities and different types of learning styles. And so this is like a very tactile activity, but this kind of also stemmed from when they were all into buying the same kind of sports drinks. We would do product reviews. And so I bring in samples of non-caffeinated drinks and then put them in little cups and let everybody sip and rate the drink, right? So like maybe Gatorade, Powerade, and Prime. And they don't know which is which, and they're going to rate it. But how we make that a literacy activity is we look at Amazon reviews, product reviews as a genre. And we look at, again, what is the audience? What is the author? And how do you phrase things? What is the appropriate length for a product review? And so we would work as a group on deciding which one was the favorite drink, deciding which one was the favorite flavor. You could do it with food if they don't have allergies. And then they work collectively to create a written product. Now, you don't even have to post it online. You could maybe post it anonymously on Amazon or something if they wanted to, or it was allowed. But if not, it's fine. You've just created a written product that is involving some planning, some editing, some collaboration, and these kind of digital citizenship skills.
Mhm.
So that one's really fun for like tactile, just kind of hands-on activity.
And so creative. I mean, and who doesn't like to do work that doesn't feel like work?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Right, right. Obviously, these work best in formats where you're doing kind of a pull-out model rather than
Mhm.
going into the class. But I do think that they all connect to common core standards in the sense that we're talking about literacy and media. And
Mhm.
so we can talk about that at the end here about how to connect that to common core or to goals that you're working on.
Mhm.
But yeah, when it feels fun, it's fun for you and the students. It doesn't feel like work, and I think in our field, a lot of people are approaching burnout and feeling really discouraged. And so my hope is always that like these ideas that worked well for me can be adapted and work well for you all too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm just excited listening to these. I'm like, oh my God, I want to do that.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fun. I mean, and even, working with different populations, like you mentioned that you work with feeding and
Mhm.
doing drink samples
You
like
know, that's exactly that was
Uh-huh.
going on in my mind. I was like,
Yeah.
this would be a great way for me to incorporate being all things feeding and swallowing and incorporating that. I was just thinking how my students could then get exposed and they're like, well, you know what? I do need to try it because I want to be able to report on it.
Yeah. And if you have a child on the caseload who is a child who stutters and they
Mhm.
want to read the product review out loud, or they want to present it to a teacher and, have a speaking opportunity from it. So you can use these activities beyond language kids.
Yeah,
And
I
then,
could see exactly expanding that for so many goals. Not
yeah,
just, I mean, I know we're talking about language and building and developing and language, but I love the review because, they love to be able to tell their opinions,
that's right.
you
Yeah, that's
know?
exactly right.
It's
And again, it
being,
puts them at a position of competence. 'Cause you're
yes,
not wrong if you like the grape flavor, it's not wrong, but how can you communicate that to your audience?
right, right.
Yeah.
It's everybody's winning,
Yeah,
everybody,
exactly.
there's not a wrong answer.
I feel like when you create activities that embrace kind of that errorless learning, you're
Mhm.
going to have success with adolescent students.
Absolutely. No one wants to come in and go, oh, I'm going to get it wrong again. And she's going to
Right.
tell me I'm getting it wrong again. Instead of going like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to come. I've got a new word to add to the dictionary, or, oh my gosh, I just saw this product. I think
Mhm.
this is one we should research. Has
Yeah.
anybody heard of this?
And that's exactly what my experience was. And, I also feel like if you're really operating from a position of respect,
Mm-hmm.
adolescents should also have the choice to opt out. And so
Sure.
what would happen is on occasion, somebody was having a bad day or they, didn't like me that day or whatever. They didn't want to come to speech. I would say, you know what? Okay, you don't have to come. I'm not going to make you come to speech. You can sit in math class or you can sit in whatever class you're in, and I'll see you next week. And then what I found is that would probably happen one time. And then they were like, actually, you know what? I don't mind being in there. So giving them that autonomy of like, I can decide if I'm coming or not really helped with like, okay, actually, I don't mind being in there. So it's interesting how that worked.
That
And
ties
then,
right into the motivation. So you're
yeah,
saying, hey, you do have a choice
yeah,
because it's your choice to come or not. It's your choice to listen or not. It's your
mhm,
choice to participate or not. And when they're seeing everybody's having fun and
yeah,
chatter, people are talking about it, sharing about it, they're going to be like, hey, wait, I'm missing out.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
It's that, what did they call it? That FOMO, fear
Huh?
of missing, fear of missing out.
I definitely have that.
Yeah, I think, yeah. So
Um,
funny.
Yeah,
Um,
and the other I have one more activity I wanted to
sure.
mention, and this is something that I think is a really important tool if you work with neurodiverse students. It is, I think, very neurodiverse affirming,
Oh,
but
good.
it is focusing on self-advocacy. So really,
Mm,
although that's more of an executive function than a language or literacy skill, I think it involves language. So self-advocacy is something that I think we should be targeting with our adolescent students as we are wanting them to become independent citizens. And one thing that you can do with students is have them create autobiographical videos or neurodiverse affirming videos. And so they're basically creating like a little YouTube video. And most of our students are not even watching TV anymore. They watch YouTube. So they know the format. My point is you don't have to post this on YouTube, but you're going through the process of creating it. And so they can research autism spectrum disorders. They can post about what their experience is. They can create a script about what their experience is like. They can select background music. They can record a video. And you go through this. Again, this is not a one session activity. It could be 2 months that you're really scaffolding, building the language, thinking about the audience, thinking about the author, and working on this collaborative writing. But it's a multimodal piece. It's a visual production, really. And so that can be presented in a classroom, that can be presented in the speech room. You could do a private YouTube channel if you want to share it with their parents. But creating autobiographical videos, maybe explaining dyslexia or explaining Tourette's or explaining, to their peers what stuttering is like, but doing it in like that asynchronous format where it's a video and it's polished and it's recorded and scripted can be a way to empower students.
Wow. Yes, that just flooded me with opportunities. Well, first of all, who doesn't like to talk about themselves, right?
True.
And I love the idea of the diversity affirming, any of those, why are you in speech? And let's talk about that. And how does that affect you? Kind of that impact. What is the impact? And then and let's talk about how it's not an impact. Let me tell you about how I think. I think that is so powerful for students to feel worthy and to be able to watch themselves on something that they see out there as like a celebrity is doing this, or that's a big deal person. They like people. I'm sorry, I'm twirling around because I couldn't think of the word. Admire. That's the word I was looking for. They're watching people that they admire. And now they're realizing, wait, I'm admiring what I'm watching. Wow. So neat.
Yeah, and I think that when we talk about neurodiverse affirming therapy, it's really critical that we're not just looking at this child with a label and not trying to fix them, that we're really trying to fix the social circle and trying to help peers understand our differences. And so the advantage, if you have a supportive classroom environment and can create a video and then show it, it's all about educating peers too. Now, I think their teachers have to play a big role in preventing bullying and having like zero tolerance for bullying and that kind of thing. But if it's set up as like an educational format and there's adult oversight, I think it can be shared pretty successfully. A lot of schools will have, like a news channel in the morning or a broadcast kind of thing in the morning. And so that's another opportunity for students to share a video they've created on a topic that might be relevant to the student body.
Absolutely.
Like using AAC.
Oh,
so,
AAC.
Yeah. So I had some students who ran a coffee cart, and then we had students who ran the PBIS like shop where the kids had points for behavior and they could buy trinkets. But it was all run by my kids with complex communication needs who had AAC devices. And so they got on the morning announcements on the video feed and were able to talk about what they were doing using their AAC devices. So it's just kind of a way to like expose the general student body to what it is they're doing and allow that interaction.
Stunning. That's amazing. I love that. I know I talked to another clinician about that coffee cart. I love that idea. So many goals, so many students can be a part of that. And I love hearing that again. I love the way you brought AAC in because that's huge. They have a voice too. All of the multi-modality and the different platforms, it's incredible. I love it. And you did tell me to remind you to come back around a little bit. Let's go back about connecting that to the Common Core, if that's okay.
Yeah. So I definitely can connect it to the Common Core, and I am going to actually pull up an article while we're talking. But I want to also say that you can create goals that are targeting this. So we've got, kind of our IEPs and our language goals.
Mhm.
And then we're sometimes working in a school system where we have the Common Core and we're kind of up against that. So, sorry, I should have had this pulled up. I'm going to
No.
pull up this article real quick.
And while you're getting that, I was just thinking, once you get, we'll talk about this, but then maybe we can go back and maybe discuss like some goal ideas, or give people shouldn't take your goal and write it for everyone, but just sometimes giving us some ideas on how you would write a goal would spark us on how we would draft a goal using for another student with another need.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Cool.
I think starting with goals, we want to think about, again, what are skills that your student might need to become an informed, active participant
Mm-hmm.
when they are an adult, to become a citizen that is informed and participating in society. So some of the goals that I like to target, I've got them pulled up now here,
Yeah.
are related to the critical media literacy, that the student can demonstrate that they can critically evaluate an online source. And that gives you a lot of leeway with your activities in terms of what kind of source you're using for digital content, that they can identify the intended audience for an online advertisement.
Mm-hmm.
And another one is that they can list ways that groups are represented in the media. And so that allows you, again, to pull different formats, pull YouTube videos, pull posts, pull blogs, and see how disorder, or even movie clips and TV shows, and see how are disorders represented, how are different abilities represented in the media. I also have some goals that I've used that relate to writing, specifically with that literacy aspect of writing, but that they will write content from multiple perspectives. And that really ties in, now we get to the Common Core part, but really ties into understanding the genre that they're using. So with the Common Core, I have a couple of Common Core goals that I've outlined, but there are Common Core standards related to literacy and technology. And so there is a Common Core standard for high schoolers that involves making strategic use of digital media, which is what we've been talking about, in presentations to enhance understanding. I'm going to read that one more time. It's making strategic use of digital media in presentations to enhance understanding. So if you do something like an anti-ableism video or an pro-autism video, that is right in line with the Common Core standard of making and creating digital media to increase understanding. There's also Common Core goals that relate to technology, being able to produce and publish writing, as well as interact and collaborate with others on the internet. That's a Common Core goal.
Wow.
And so you do things like product reviews and you look at examples of posts and ads, you're really tying into this idea of digital competence and digital citizenship, I think, for using technology successfully and safely. And then finally, another one that I had highlighted here was related to kind of developing cognitive flexibility, which is something that can be really challenging for kids with language disorders. But a Common Core goal is being able to compare and contrast text to an audio, video, or multimedia version. And I'll read that one more time. Comparing and contrasting text to an audio, video, or multimedia version. And so when you do things like comparing printed vintage ads with online ads, that's exactly what you're targeting. You're hitting that point there with, we're really comparing print media versus the analog versus the digital media. Comparing and contrasting, because there are similarities and differences. And all that kind of weaves into our understanding of the world around us.
Absolutely. And you touched on something just a second ago when you said perspective taking, because it's when so if they're working on creating something, you're saying know your audience and the intent. And then if you switched that on them and said, actually, let's change the intent. How would you have to change it? That is some high level thinking. That's some critical skill, but in a fun way that they don't feel like it's work. But you're working on these really high level skills that are so needed.
Yeah, and that because they are higher level may require more scaffolding. So just,
Sure.
always knowing that sometimes you're doing the brunt of the interpretation at first, or
Mhm.
sometimes you're relying on your Artic or fluency kids to do some of the language interpretation and analysis at
Right.
first. But like you
Know your
mentioned,
audience
yeah,
within your, and then use your
yeah.
audience to help.
And work the teachers into it, because we
Oh,
don't work
yeah.
on an island in a school system. So we have some amazing ELA teachers who are doing really creative things, and bringing them into it as well can be a fun experience.
Yeah, being able to, right, connect it to their, not just what's happening in speech, but what's happening in their other courses and that's making all the connections.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. I am just blown away. I want to be in your class. I want to learn more. That you so many, there's these little terms that you've used that I feel like, man, I feel like an old lady, that I'm not a digital native. And that came into play actually earlier today. I had to call my daughter. She just turned 30, and I'm like, I'm losing my mind. I can't figure out why this isn't working. Which is funny because, of course, my daughter calls me, Mom, how do you boil water? I'm not, she's brilliant, but I'm just saying, the things that kids will ask us. And now in turn, I'm really dependent on these digital natives, and how I love that.
Yeah, and
Um,
ultimately they are so much fun. I mean, I think, it goes back to having like a genuine fondness for this age group. The people
mhm.
that stick around with middle and high schoolers genuinely love the interaction. And I think most of us would agree they're hilarious. Like they're so much fun. And if you can laugh at yourself and laugh at your incompetence and let
Mhm.
kind of be on the receiving end of that, it can just be such a worthwhile experience. So, like I said, I have teenagers at home. I mean, they're constant eye rolls, but it keeps me fresh. So it's fun.
Right. And I mean, and I sometimes say, my grandmother, she came from Australia, but she never used a microwave and she never used the dishwasher. She didn't do it. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm my grandmother in today's world because I don't Instagram. I'm like, I don't TikTok. I
Well, you're
it,
hosting a podcast, so I'd give you
Okay,
a
I'm
filler
getting
for
better.
that.
You're right. You're okay. Thank you. Thank you. You're helping me feel more resilient. Thank you. Because I was showing my insecurity there, but you're right. I am branching out. I am getting better. Yeah, and I love the way that you brought in the goals, because a lot of times when we're listening to someone, we're like, oh yeah, that's what a wonderful activity. But the way that you literally said these goals or these activities are aligned to those core curriculum goals.
Mhm.
That is so powerful for us because, we can be out there listening or watching a great activity and we're like, yeah, but what am I going to target?
Yeah.
And you're able to target a big umbrella.
Yeah. To me, it really correlates exactly to the same as when you're doing early intervention and you're playing on the floor with a kid and a parent says, what am I paying you for? You're just playing, right? We're
Right.
like, well, no, I'm really targeting all these things. So like you mentioned, it being fun to come into speech. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you'll kind of get that question like, well, like, what are you guys even doing? Like, it's not even related to the book we're reading in English. But you have to be able to explain what you are targeting and what the goals are, because
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, it is fun for the students, but we have a professional degree for a reason and we're targeting those skills. So I feel like as SLPs, we're always explaining what we do to other people.
I agree. I agree. Yeah. Is there anything else? Is there anything that we didn't touch on yet?
No, I would just say that I guess my last concluding point is I do encourage people not to just dismiss kids because they're getting out of elementary school. I think there is a lot of times a lot of pressure from the administrators or from the teachers to start dismissing kids. And if they're done with speech and they're done with their goals, sure, get them off your caseload. But I think a lot of our kids with LLD and language impairment, because of the neuroplasticity and the growth that is happening during adolescence, this can be a wonderful time to keep supporting them and keep seeing growth happen rather than just sending them out to rely on classroom accommodations.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think this has been so informative and it's really kind of lit a fire under me to
Oh,
get more.
awesome.
Yeah, I think the ideas that you've given are just fantastic. You've given us at least a starting point for some of us, like me, a starting point of where I can start. I could see bringing in, I'm definitely going to use the vintage ads. I think that's hilarious. What a wonderful concept. What a wonderful idea. I I love everything that you were telling us about. I think it's important to reiterate the safety component, if you don't mind. I think if you don't mind doing that, because I think some of us might be like a little hesitant
Mhm.
because we want to make sure that we are safe and the students are safe.
Yeah. So I would say keep three things in mind. This
Mhm.
sounds way more organized than it really is in my head, but three things really come to mind as you're saying that. One would be to know your school system's policy regarding internet usage.
Okay.
So, every school system has guidelines. Find out what yours are. Are you allowed to get on Instagram when you're in the school district? Maybe you are, maybe you're not.
Mhm.
So the second thing is to let parents know what you're doing. I think it's really helpful that I'm not big into sending home homework for speech when they're in teenagers, but sending home some weekly flyers or monthly newsletter that just says, hey, this is what we're creating. We're content creators. This is what we're doing. And then the third thing is that a lot of every idea I talk about doesn't mean you're having to post it online. We're
Right.
talking about these social media platforms to inform and empower students to be critical thinkers, which is the language skill. But we're not talking about you're getting on all these different platforms and friending the kids and posting their images or their content online. I don't think you need to do that at all to target these skills.
Right. I do know in my district that parents have to permit students to be photographed or filmed in any digital platform for that. So it would be important to make sure that that you have a release for that from the parents for sure. And I think doubly important is being transparent with the parents saying, no, we're not trying to build influencers. We're
Yes,
not, we're
because
not trying.
yes, because the students are going to come home and say, "Oh, we're making a YouTube video in speech," and they're excited.
Right.
So yes, if you can get on the front of that and tell parents, this is what we're doing, this is what we're going to do with the video. It might be a private YouTube link that the parent can see, or it might be that you don't post it at all, but letting them know what you're going to do or asking them what they think.
And thinking just being a parent, I would be excited to see something that
Mhm.
my child created and it looks professional and how much pride that they would have to share. I just think that would bring what a wonderful thing to share with families. Because I don't know how much really the families in our secondary settings really get how much connection they make between the school and speech and home.
Yeah. Well, only about 3% of SLPs work full time in a secondary school. So for the vast majority of SLPs, it's an itinerant caseload where they have maybe an elementary school and then a handful of kids at a high school.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of times a gap with parent communication.
Right. And I just see this as another avenue, or actually a great avenue to make that connection with the families and
Mhm.
maybe giving them some ideas how to support their child and give them they might not have known that their child had these certain interests
Yeah.
and abilities and skills and all of that. What a wonderful, and well, I know we talked about let's keep them on, but this would also be a great presentation for a dismissal as well, that you're literally showing them their skills
Yeah.
rather
It's an
than just a
artifact.
written, that here's my, therapy note. You're actually like, well, let me show you what we produced, or what little Carolyn produced, and showing you can't refute that skill right there,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Well, I really want to keep talking and I wish that we could. I hope that you enjoyed yourself because I know I did. And I know our listeners are going to be like, this was amazing. I'd love to make sure you would be okay coming back. I know that there's so much more that we can talk about. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. I'm putting together something right now on trauma informed care. So maybe that can be the next piece we talk about. But this was a lot of fun. I hope your listeners got something as a takeaway, and I hope that everyone has a really good summer.
Me too. All right. Thank you.
Okay, bye. Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
everyone. Thanks for joining us on today's podcast. Remember to go to speechtherapypd.com to learn more about earning ASHA CEUs. We appreciate your positive reviews and support and would love for you to write a quick review and subscribe. If you have indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete address in your account profile prior to the course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to be reflected on your ASHA transcript. For our School of Speech listeners, we have a special coupon code to receive $20 off any annual subscription to speechtherapypd.com. Head over there to get ASHA CEUs for listening to this podcast and all other episodes. The code is SCHOOL20. That is SCHOOL20. Hope to see you on our next episode. Also, please don't hesitate to tell us which topics you would like us to cover in future episodes. To get in touch, drop us a line in the comment section or send us a message on social media.